Essentially, I'm trying to lay a foundation and some pathways into a post-COVID world where we can get a little bit of a better grasp around these kind of situations and how to better engage audiences moving into the future, whether it be through hybrid, virtual, and in-person experiences. So looking at content strategies and the pathways to get there. So a lot of the actual discussion will be centered around what that hybrid in-person experience kind of looks like, but it's certainly applicable in a number of different ways. So I hope everybody enjoys it. I'll be here to answer any questions in the chat. And yeah, I'm looking forward to getting any feedback.
All right, without further ado, let's get this video going.
Thank you everyone for joining me to hear about my take on content and engagement strategies and the steps that you can take as you look at your program planning for your future events. My hope today is that this session will effectively provide you with some insight into how to build a better content and program engagement plan as you seek to help pair the right audience with the right kinds of content. Ideally, the outcomes for this session should include the importance of building audience and presenter personas and identifying learning environments that best suit these groups, content relevance and what it means for building better engagement, and how content engagement has shifted from pre-COVID to a world where virtual and hybrid are now common program definers. A bit about me: I'm a family guy. I have a wife and toddler to look after. I also work at Freeman, mostly within the not-for-profit professional association space. And the most important thing to me is the preservation and happiness of my son's health and well-being, as well as a curiosity. So we're going to break today's discussion up into two main parts: audience and content, both of which, as you know, are crucial to the success of your program and platform development. When we look at events, it's always best to understand what people's intentions are when they visit your learning environment or as they navigate your learning environment. We're able to classify participant experience based on the objectives a participant or an audience member seeks to accomplish while at your event. The notion of intentions has not been a mystery, but we are beginning to better define ways to connect with participants and stakeholders by understanding the framework criteria that is the foundation for this overall expectation framework. With this in mind, we are better able to design an experience that engages your audience in a more successful way. So these main intentions identified by the Gensler Institute provide us with some context into how attendees navigate programs and interact with peers or content. Now, if we look at attendees who are navigating an event and are in the task mode, essentially they have something very specific that they're trying to accomplish. Essentially, their event experience is pre-planned and comes designed with a direct focus or action that they want to take. Perhaps it's engagement with specific kind of content that they've planned out previously, or specific exhibitors that they seek to engage and speak with. Those in the social mode typically seek to connect with peers or other people within communities of their own. And basically, one thing to consider is that these modes are not mutually exclusive of each other, and they can be combined with other modes. So attendees in social mode might combine with some of these other modes in the framework here. What's really important to consider is that you need to provide a variety of spaces that support social connection and interaction. And the building of community is paramount for those in the social mode. Now, looking at discovery, it's very important that you understand that these people don't have a concrete plan. Often they are killing time between activities. They like to wander. Essentially for them, spontaneity and authenticity are something that is more value to them than anything else. Those in entertainment mode are obviously looking for that quick fix or entertainment impact, and basically are looking for something that is the wow factor. And while there's a lot of people like myself, I really enjoy that wow factor from time to time. It's definitely something that I want to steer away from on a regular basis. And those in aspiration mode are actually, this for me is probably one of the most important. Those in aspiration mode seek experiences through which they can grow, expand, or be connected to other people with greater purpose. So ideally, we are connecting users to, or connecting audience members to a larger mission and purpose, and we provide opportunities for personal growth. Inspiration is absolutely crucial here. So things like community building activities, mentorship programs, or even peer-to-peer discussion and facilitating those interactions. We need to consider how defining personas for your event will ensure we connect the right people with the right content and build toward new learning communities. Not just learning opportunities, but the communities themselves. Within the user experience space, a persona is technically a fictional character that is designed to represent a user type or an audience member that might interact with content, peers, or an experience in a particular way. Marketers typically use personas together with their market segmentation exercises, where qualitative personas are constructed to be representative of a specific segment where they're trying to elicit a specific behavior. And that's how they establish their marketing analytics and forecasting. We need to consider how defining personas for your event will ensure we connect the right people with the right content, right? So let's look at how using historical data might best aggregate data sets to establish these personas. Personas will help define the kind of value proposition you need to cater to your audience. So each persona has different priorities when it comes to their engagement with content and within a learning environment. You should also be very mindful of what stage an adult learner is. They're basically what they're at in their life. This is important because it allows you to actualize information that is relevant in real time and make strategic recommendations to your audience on what they should be participating in. So for example, if we look at this data set here, what I'm looking at is a virtual event data set that provides me with an outlook on navigation views, as well as different areas within an event that a specific audience member or a group of audience members has visited. Now, while this has essentially been very anonymized and very generalized, it gives you an idea of the kind of data that you should be looking at. So again, data will assist with refining your overall value proposition, as well as identifying persona priorities. So are you evaluating your engagement performance year over year, or even in a more granular way, or outlook rather? How has your show evolved, and are you taking actions to ensure it's evolving in a positive way? The reason this is important is because it'll help us define success. What's really important is to think about what engagement success means and how it's measured for your event. So is it, if people are just showing up, that you are measuring your engagement by, or revenue generation in a specific category? Groups need to actively define a list of KPIs beyond just revenue growth or attendance to remain viable. So looking at, for example, session dwell times, or the amount of time somebody's in a session room or on the exhibit floor. Interaction measurement, right? So how many times was a speaker or presenter or a poster presenter engaged throughout a presentation by an audience member, leading to Q&A engagement. And then active participation for those types of learning opportunities that are hands-on learning opportunities. Ideally, you want to look into some basic content analytics as well as content marketing metrics that should be tracked. It'll directly influence the way you rate performance. So another question that I absolutely have to ask, and that we often ask a lot of groups, is what is your digital engagement strategy? Not just the learning medium, so I'm not saying your virtual event platform, but how are you staying relevant? And a lot of that is rooted in virtual engagement and digital strategy. So if you've never looked at your historical data or elected to use it, why even bother? Some questions we may need to ask are, how do we determine a successful engagement and drive a community shift for a specific persona that may not have successfully engaged with content or people? If you're going to take the steps forward that you need to and establish KPIs, look at data and take action based on the findings, you need to constantly remain nimble, which means that you're constantly making changes, whether it's on the fly at your event or for the long term. This might not be something just that you can simply take on or hat that you can just put on or wear. This may mean you hire or engage a separate party or someone to work with you in establishing the foundation of these principles and guiding you to its effective use. So, what attracts people to content? Well, there are many things that substantiates a person's connection to content. First and foremost is content relevance, right? So making sure that you're speaking to somebody that wants to be engaged with a specific set of content and making sure that content is applicable to their area of expertise is extremely important. Next is, are you providing value with that content? Is that person finding that content to be impactful to the work that they do on a day-to-day basis? Is it thought-provoking? Is it really going to generate further discussion and engagement among your groups and communities? And then also, does it drive collaborative opportunity? So are people able to engage with peers? And this is going back to that discovery mode where people in discovery mode crave that interaction, peer-to-peer connection in order to grow. I really want to point some attention to some of the most successful blogs. And I know this is going to be a little bit of a weird take, but these blogs have remained true to the creation of content that is relevant to groups, that is engaging, and is continuing to engage professionals within these spaces. So if we look at a group like Huffington Post, all right, essentially they started out as an American political write-up. They've now shifted to a medium where niche topics are driving their growth and still within the political space. On top of that, the content that they monetize grosses in excess of approximately $14 million monthly. So to think about how people are connecting with content that is relevant to them within the political space specifically with respect to Huffington Post, to be able to generate that kind of revenue is substantial. So think about how compelling that content is and how it continues to drive growth. We look at a group like TMZ, and I'm sure everybody knows the name. They started out as a celebrity gossip tabloid, and they're still within that celebrity space, but they've shifted to more news content and sharing breaking stories still within that celebrity space, but they've generated tons and tons of money in advertising revenue. And then if we look at the Business Insider, Business Insider has always been business news analysis, and they've become experts at targeting audiences specifically within the business space. But again, these are all groups that have generated content over the course of the last 20 years, refined their audience, and been able to monetize it. Why? Because it's compelling. I'm not saying that the information and content that you provide as an organization isn't compelling, but there's a model here that could be applied to the way that you monetize your content and engage your audience. Another thing really to consider is the retail space and what the retail space has done in terms of identifying specific target customers through demand gen marketing. Marketing automation in the digital space has grown into an industry on its own, but parallels can certainly be drawn into the engagement and content engagement space. So, what are you doing to ensure your communities contribute to content development? Communities of professionals participate within your learning platforms and actively building content together. You are truly advancing the development of information and advancing your industry by encouraging this kind of content building together and collaboration. So it leads to transformative learning, which is the benefit of all this. There's nothing more powerful than collaboration and co-creation. Collaborative learning is effective for adult learners because it allows them to use their shared connections and experiences to explain and build upon concepts from the programs in ways instructors cannot. So, with these points in mind, how can you, as an organizer, encourage people to be resourceful and reach out to their own communities and peers? Well, just like anything that goes viral, we need to speak about it. So people need to consume that content and then internalize and process it. Unfortunately, we live in an age of viral content where a good meme is more valuable than a historical quote or reference. But just think about how many times you've seen a meme. If this is a generational reference, I apologize, but if you see a meme and you've shared it or sent it to a friend of yours or a colleague. So from content conception to internalization and processing of that content, we need to obviously understand whether or not it's important to speak about that content or topic within your professional community. Additionally, mapping this content as innovative or part of a hypothetical theory to support conversation will essentially define the value of that content as you're processing it. And then truly this is a collaborative process, but you need to build that content into compelling programming that will speak to the broader audience who attends your events as well, right? So this is really a collaborative process, as mentioned. And the only way it can really be facilitated is through the interaction among peers within their communities. It's eerily similar to the way that scholarly articles are put together. Something that I'd like to emphasize in all of this, and it's more of a secondary thought, given how we're discussing content. An author by the name of John Holt summarized a personal account of classroom experiences that expose some of the challenges within traditional learning environments. But there are two key points and themes that are emphasized within this book. So, traditional learning environments do not encourage thinking, discovery, and understanding. And also, people's natural curiosity needs to be embraced. And thus, people need to explore their natural ability to think. So, without getting too deep into environmental design, the delivery location of a presentation is equally as important as the content itself. It becomes the nurturing environment conducive to learning. You cannot dictate the outcome of the experience. The objective we often fail to consider is that learner outcomes should be defined by the audience members. Empowering learners to participate in discussions and help drive the content becomes incredibly more powerful in terms of how your content evolves. This is done through providing continued access to resources. In this instance, consider resources as peers, as part of the communities your professionals collaborate with. The concepts of working memory and interference are inevitably influenced by learner engagement and motivation to listen to and work with new or unfamiliar material. As well, awareness of how learner motivation and engagement influences knowledge acquisition is important. More often than not, presenters are repeat presenters. They presented before. Do they have the tools or knowledge on how to motivate learners for better engagement? Not necessarily. Think about someone who is a compelling presenter, however. Perhaps somebody who's deeply involved within their community and participates in active peer discussion with others of like or similar persona. This encourages a rise in learner engagement. We spoke about the presentation environment as a stimulator of learning. Wow, here's an interesting fact. Adult learner retention rates post-lecture have been estimated at a dismal 5%. Does this mean that people aren't interested in the content? Not necessarily. Maybe it means they aren't engaging with the content to process the information. Maybe a change of environment is needed. Going back to an earlier image in the presentation, it's important to discuss some of the challenges we experience when building content. For example, here obviously we see a group of people participating within a session. It's a show floor session. There are two presenters. Obviously there's collaboration between the presenters. They may be peers within their own community, and there's an engaged audience. The average adult learner attention span is between 15 and 20 minutes. We become mentally fatigued and often distracted. Well, can you guess what that distraction is? If your reaction to these photos is a deep breath and a sigh, I think we're on the same page and we can agree that these are pretty mentally exhausting to just look at, and frustrating to say the least. If we look at what we do when we go shopping, there's a lot of distraction and mental fatigue that we experience anyway. It's just the fact of it. Can we draw parallels in these types of experiences to the learning environments that we're exposed to in events, either in person or virtually? Absolutely. So one question that I have to ask is, regardless of engagement, how can anything be productive in these environments? Maybe one option to create a more productive type of content engagement is by rethinking our approach to the learning environment and in our delivery. So, can we change the way content is delivered, by changing the environment and the format? That means different sensory experiences conducive to learning or that resonate within the community of people who are participating in the session. Sensory experiences like visual, auditory, olfactory, or whatever. So another thing that I really like to ask people that I work with is how are they sourcing content? Is it through calls for abstract? Are they crowdsourcing? Survey responses perhaps from previous events? This type of content generation is great, but you have to decide what is more important, the livelihood of your event. Is it what your audience wants to engage with or what your stakeholders want your audience to engage with? Now more than ever, exhibitors and sponsors industry-wide are actually facing challenges with respect to their traditional means of business growth when participating in events. Target engagement is actually at an all-time low within the virtual space, and this might mean that you have the power to leverage your key business attractors and partners to completely shift and transform your industry. I'd like to go back to my first slide of this presentation. And I was actually on an escalator heading down from a session back to my office at an event that I was working at, and I heard this. And I kind of laughed, and the guys who were having this conversation turned around, and I apologize for eavesdropping, but it's just something that I hear all too often. That led me to ask questions like, why isn't content more compelling for an audience? Or how do you drive better or greater content engagement within an audience? Most audiences will attend sessions or lectures with a pre-existing knowledge of the topics that exist within that session based on their experience or interests. These audience members also have knowledge deficits they need to fill. They're very aware of this as well, and they come prepared to fill these deficits. So let me ask you this: what kind of learning environment are you placing your audiences in? Is it something like a hands-on learning environment? Because the benefit of a hands-on learning environment versus classroom are, there's a from theory to practice model that ensures active learner participation. As well, the application of this practice leads to a greater success through an increase in interaction with presenters and peers. Things like theaters that are conducive to quick turnover presentations, but also can serve as on-demand platforms for any sessions that may be streamed remotely or from an external source. And then also intimate and small group conversations and discussions to certainly drive that continued community interaction. Another question that you need to ask yourself is, what distractions are you competing with? where is your learner's time and energy going to be spent when they lose interest? And you know, that I think there's a very obvious answer to that, but learners also have objectives for what they're seeking to accomplish. And if you can't cater to that, you're going to lose them. These three images come from the same general session. So I think it's safe to say, based on the visual evidence, at least what's represented here, that it's real easy to lose audience members and audience participation and interaction. The content isn't compelling. With the shift to virtual, a major question we need to ask is, how are you creating opportunities for vendor partners in X business verticals to connect with audience members through presentation content? Basically, the question that I'm really asking is, what are you doing to leverage your partners and have them drive content to help build your programming? Obviously, a lot of the medical space cannot leverage sponsored programming within their event education because of the CMEs that are allocated, but that doesn't mean people aren't interested in hearing from thought leaders within their industries that exist or work for these vendor partner companies. Why can't we involve more segment-specific content creation from partners and involve them in those persona communities as well to help drive the advancement of your industry? These types of engagements can exist in the physical and virtual event space. Lastly, I think it's real important that we understand where we were pre-COVID and where we've gone to right now, and what we're looking at as a potential engagement model for the future. So if we look at the pre-COVID event mix, events took place at a specific point in time and at a location that was very specific that people visited. All the content for your programming that was relevant, late breaking for an audience was delivered at this specific event. Now, whether it lived on and continued, it's hard to track and it's hard to manage if you haven't been collecting that data or if you don't have substantial post-event learning programs. So it really begs the question, where do we go to create a better engagement with your audience? Currently, right now, as we're in this world of COVID, we are looking at the virtual event space. And we've now lost the in-person component, and we're now focusing more on the streaming virtual component. And traditionally, event content is now living on a little bit further within the virtual event space, but there's no continuity. There's no real means of creating that engagement or that connection moving forward. Where we're going and where we could see the most value is in creating a year-long, multi-platform, dynamic conversation where not only are your communities and your audience and participants interacting with content on a regular basis, but they're interacting with each other. And they're interacting with the association or the organization on a regular basis as well. So the model goes from now COVID, in this COVID world, virtual event, to post-COVID, in-person, incorporating that virtual event experience. That virtual event experience is built around a 365-day-a-year strategy that allows your audience to continue engaging and connecting with each other on a regular basis. I'd like to thank everybody for attending this session today. And if there are any questions, please don't hesitate to connect with me or ask questions post-session. Thank you. Hey, Michelle, you're muted.
Again, sorry about that. Just wanted to, again, thank everybody for joining the session. We have, well, like, we had a minute for any last minute questions. So if there are any, feel free to ask. Otherwise, Ted will be jumping into Central Perk a little bit after this session to continue any conversations that you might have.
Yeah, really. Thank you very much, everybody, for sticking around. Happy to answer any questions in the Central Perk. Also, if you want to follow up or even just talk offline, I will just put my email right here in the chat. You can always shoot me. Whoops, I posted that to our feel free to just shoot me an email if you want to have a conversation about any content engagement. I know the content is a little bit arbitrary just because of how broad it was, but certainly happy to refine and drill down as necessary. So, hey, Maud.
Hi, how's it going?
Good.
Good.
Great. Thanks